Okay, so from the main interface, we first off start on the system dashboard page. Okay, system dashboard is basically going to show you what are just the general state of the system in terms of its health score. So the system uses a score of 0 to 100, where 100 being perfectly fine. 0 is going to be some major issue like, power supply failed, the box crashed, something like that. It's a numerical number, 0 to 100. And then from the system screen, or excuse me, after the system screen, if we look back at the GUI, next tab is going to be tenants. And tenants, this is where we configure all of our logical policies. So 99% of the configuration that you do in the ACI is going to be under the tenants tab once we configure the physical infrastructure portions. Okay, so we need to tell the controller where the leafs and the spines are. And we need to initialize the physical links, like configure CDP on them, or configure it. Is this a single interface? Is this a port channel? Is this a virtual port channel? So there are still physical functions of the ports that we need to configure, but then the logical policies for the actual applications are going to be configured here under tenants. Okay, then after tenants, we have fabric. Okay, so fabric is going to be the physical functions of the network. And under fabric, we have two main sections, which are the fabric policies and the fabric access policies. Where the fabric policies, this is from the leaf switches northbound up to the spines. So any of the control plane protocols like the ISIS that's running behind the scenes. There's a directory protocol called the Council of Oracle Protocol, or COOP. So those options would be set here under the fabric policies. But the vast majority of the work that we're going to be doing under this screen under fabric is under fabric access policies. So again, if we think of the leafs from a physical point of view, so we have the leaf that is connecting physically to the spine. And then this port here, we would consider it to be a fabric port. Okay, so fabric policies are going to affect the relationship between the leafs and the spines. And then from the leaf down to the host, this is a fabric access port. Okay, so whether it's from an Ethernet point of view, whether it's an access port or a trunk port is a different discussion. It doesn't have anything to do with this. We're just saying this is where you access the applications. So that's going to be any of the southbound interfaces that are just running normal, regular layer 2 Ethernet. Okay, so access policies is where we configure things like port channels, virtual port channels, anything that you would normally configure at the interface level, like a policer, storm control, CDP, LLDP, etc. All that stuff is going to be under the fabric access policies. So the vast majority of stuff that you're going to do in the ACI is mainly going to be under these two tabs. Okay, so under tenants or under fabric. Okay, then next we have virtual machine networking. Okay, VM networking is going to be if we're talking to VMware vCenter, Microsoft Hyper-V SCVMM, whatever the other management applications are for the different hypervisors like KVM, etc. Okay, then we have layer 4 to layer 7 services. This is going to be for what's called a service graph or for service chaining. The idea being here is that we have traffic coming in from, let's say, the internet and going to our web server. But before we go to the web server, we want to go to the firewall for inspection. And we want to go to the F5 load balancer to make a load balancing decision. So L4 to layer 7 services is basically a way to kind of like policy route the traffic through the fabric to say that if I have the internet on one side and then I have the host on the other, I want to come in from the internet, go to the firewall, and then I want to go to the load balancer and then go to the host. That's what would be controlled by these layer 4 to layer 7 services. So we would configure a graph basically saying that you're allowed to go from the internet to the firewall, you're allowed to go from the firewall to the load balancer, allowed to go from the load balancer to the host, and then return back in this direction. And basically it's like a blueprint of how the traffic flow goes through the fabric before it goes from the source to the destination. So when we look at this in more detail later, the actual implementation, and compare this to traditional networking, you'll see that it's much easier to integrate these other services layer devices into the ACI than it is in traditional networking, because we don't need to do any fancy routing designs or policy routing or anything like that. There's a direct integration that works from the APIC controller to the other applications, whether that's like an ASA firewall, Checkpoint, Palo Alto, F5, et cetera. There's tons of plugins for those other vendor applications. Okay, then we have admin, which would be stuff like passwords, firmware management, backing up the config, stuff like that. Okay, then lastly, we have operations, which is going to be our troubleshooting tools. Okay, so operations would be like if you want to do a trace route through the fabric. Okay, so what's the source, what's the destination? Then you could see, some troubleshooting tools. Last but not least, one that's not listed there on the slides. This is new for 2.2, which is the ACI App Center. This allows you to write custom code or custom applications that run directly on box. So you can run them from the API controller itself and then talk to your applications that are inside of the fabric. Okay, so this one we're not really going to spend any time on, but there is like an archive on Cisco's website of these different applications that you can download and run. But this is going to be a little bit outside of our scope. What we're mainly going to focus on is going to be the layer 2 connectivity, the layer 3 connectivity, so the core features of the box. So how do we forward traffic through it? What are the integrations with some of the other applications? Like how do we talk to vCenter for ESXi management? How do we talk to some of the other applications like an ASA firewall to do service insertion? And then beyond that, we'll look at some of the automation of the system and then just kind of talk about some of the other features and functions of the system. Okay, there's a question here, will we be doing service chaining? Yes, yes we will. So when we go through layer 4 to layer 7 services, we'll talk about the service graphs and the service chaining.